Welcome to Mystery Files. Today we will tell you some wild things, but nothing quite like the story. It's about a woman named Lisa Caldwell, who found herself wrapped up in an obsession so deep it led to tragedy. Lisa Caldwell was in her early 50s, but you wouldn't guess it just by looking at her. She had this kind of timeless beauty, the kind that came from more than just good genetics. She was polished and confident, someone who always seemed to have control of everything around her. That kind of power came from the fact that she had built an empire in the biotech world. She didn't just dabble in science. She was at the cutting edge, running a company that specialized in brain interface technology. From the outside, she had it all: money, success, and respect. But behind all of that, there was a hunger, a need for something more personal, more intimate. Then there was Ethan Cooper, and he was about as different from Lisa as you could get. He was just 25 years old, tall and handsome in a rugged sort of way, but clearly struggling to figure out his place in the world. Ethan had dropped out of college after things got tough, and he found himself bouncing from one low-paying job to the next. He wasn't lazy, just lost, like so many young men trying to figure out their purpose. He didn't have a clear path, no direction, and that's what made him easy to influence. Their story started like a lot of these things do, by chance. Lisa was in a coffee shop, just passing through, and there was Ethan behind the counter, pouring drinks, and looking like life hadn't given him much to work with. But something about him caught Lisa's attention. Maybe it was his charm, or maybe she saw a bit of herself in him, someone with potential, but without the means to make it happen. Either way, from that moment on, their lives became intertwined in a way neither of them could have expected. Lisa had everything she could ever want materially, but she was lonely. She craved companionship, someone who could bring some excitement and youth back into her life. Ethan, on the other hand, had nothing but a long string of bad luck. So when Lisa offered him a way out, a glimpse into a life he'd never had, a life full of luxury and opportunity, it must have seemed like a dream come true. At first, their relationship was exactly what they both needed. For Lisa, having a young, attractive man on her arm made her feel alive again. She enjoyed showing him off, especially to her friends and business colleagues who were probably all wondering how she had managed to land someone so much younger. For Ethan, being with Lisa meant stability, security, and a chance to live in a world he'd only ever seen from the outside. It was a world of fancy dinners, expensive suits, and private jets, things he'd never have dreamed of in his old life. It was more than just physical attraction between them, though. Lisa saw Ethan as a project, someone she could mold into the perfect companion. She took pleasure in teaching him about the finer things in life, how to appreciate art, fine wine, and gourmet food. And Ethan, well, he was more than happy to go along with it. He wasn't blind to the fact that Lisa's interest in him came with strings attached, but at that point in his life, the trade-off seemed more than worth it. For almost a year, they lived in their own little bubble, hidden away from the prying eyes of the small town of Willow Creek. To the outside world, they might have looked like an odd couple, but no one really questioned it. Lisa had always done things her own way, and Ethan was just another piece of her carefully curated life. But as time passed, that delicate balance began to shift, and the cracks in their perfect arrangement started to show. Ethan, once eager to follow Lisa's lead, started to feel the weight of her expectations. He wasn't just living with her, he was living for her. Every move he made, every decision, had to be approved by Lisa, and that kind of control can wear a person down. At the same time, Lisa's need to keep Ethan close, to make sure he stayed hers and hers alone, grew stronger. What had started as a mutually beneficial relationship was turning into something far more complicated and far more dangerous. You see, people like Lisa don't like to lose control. And for someone like Ethan, who was still figuring out who he was, that kind of pressure could only last so long before something gave. At first glance, their relationship might have seemed strange to outsiders. But for Lisa Caldwell and Ethan Cooper, it made sense. It was more than just an arrangement. There was chemistry between them from day one. Lisa wasn't just after a trophy to show off. She wanted a companion who could make her feel young again. Ethan, for his part, was drawn to the excitement and the luxurious life she could offer. A life far removed from the struggles he was used to. Things heated up quickly between them. Lisa had this magnetic energy that Ethan couldn't resist. From their first night together, it was clear this wasn't just some fling. Lisa had a way of making Ethan feel desired, like he was the only man in the world, and that kind of attention was new for him. She wasn't shy about showing him what she liked either, taking the lead in the bedroom, and Ethan, eager to please, quickly followed her pace. Lisa, being older and more experienced, brought a confidence that Ethan had never experienced before. She made sure every moment they spent together was intense, making him feel wanted in ways he hadn't felt before. The thrill of their connection wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Lisa knew exactly how to make Ethan feel like he belonged in her world, even though he came from a much different one. And for a young guy who had been wandering aimlessly, that kind of validation was powerful. Their relationship was passionate, no doubt. Lisa had a way of turning simple nights at home into something electric. She'd surprise Ethan with little things. A touch here, a whisper there, just enough to keep the fire burning. It wasn't just about sex, though that was a big part of it. The physical connection they shared seemed to ignite everything around them. But for Lisa, it was also about reclaiming a part of her youth. Every night spent with Ethan was a reminder that she still had what it took to capture the attention of a man much younger than her. Ethan, on the other hand, was swept up in it all. He couldn't believe his luck. This beautiful, successful woman not only wanted him, but also introduced him to a life of luxury he'd never even dreamed of. Expensive dinners, private getaways, and late nights in five-star hotels. Ethan had never known anything like it. He enjoyed the attention, the thrill of being with someone who knew exactly what she wanted, both in and out of the bedroom. It was intoxicating. Lisa pushed the boundaries of what Ethan had known. She made sure their time together wasn't just exciting, but intense, both physically and emotionally. For Ethan, it was like nothing he'd experienced before. She was always in control, whether they were at a gala, where she proudly showed him off, or behind closed doors, where she made sure he never forgot who held the reins. Their nights together were filled with passion, and Lisa reveled in Ethan's youthful energy. It wasn't just about lust. There was something deeper driving her. Lisa wanted to feel alive again, and Ethan was the key to that. She would often tell him how much she needed him, how he brought excitement back into her life. For Ethan, hearing that from someone as powerful as Lisa made him feel important in ways he never had before. It wasn't just the physical attraction that kept him hooked. It was the idea that he was more than just some guy. He was the man Lisa Caldwell wanted and needed. But over time, that same intensity started to feel suffocating. What began as a whirlwind romance turned into something more complicated. Lisa wasn't just looking for a fun fling. She wanted control. At first, Ethan didn't mind. The gifts, the lifestyle, the way she made him feel, all of it was worth it. But the more Lisa tightened her grip, the more Ethan began to feel like he was losing himself. Lisa's desire for control didn't stay confined to the bedroom. She wanted to dictate every part of Ethan's life. What he wore, where he went, who he saw. The excitement that once fueled their relationship started to feel like a cage for Ethan. He was no longer just the young man Lisa had brought into her life. He was becoming a possession, something for her to mold and shape into exactly what she wanted. As the months went on, the cracks in their relationship became harder to ignore. The passion was still there, but the dynamic was changing. Lisa's need for control was growing, and Ethan was starting to feel the weight of it. The physical connection they once shared so easily now had an undercurrent of tension. Lisa expected more from him, and when he didn't live up to her expectations, she made sure he felt it. What had once been thrilling now felt more like an obligation. Ethan started pulling back, but Lisa, sensing that shift, clung even tighter. She wasn't about to let him slip away. For her, the relationship wasn't just about love or lust anymore. It was about power. She wanted to maintain control over Ethan, both emotionally and physically. And the more he resisted, the harder she pushed. And so, what had started as a relationship full of excitement and mutual desire was turning into something far more complex and far more dangerous. Ethan Cooper's life couldn't have been more different from Lisa's. He grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the youngest of 4 kids in a family that always seemed to be struggling. His dad was a long-haul truck driver who wasn't around much, and when he was, he spent most of his time drinking. His mom did her best to hold things together, but she had her own battles with depression. Ethan learned to take care of himself early on. He wasn't much for school, but his good looks and charm got him by. Despite not putting in much effort, he scored surprisingly high on his SATs, and with his skills on the basketball court, he managed to land a scholarship at a small liberal arts college in Philadelphia. But once he got there, the freedom went to his head. He fell into the party scene, his grades tanked, and by the end of his freshman year, he lost his scholarship. Too ashamed to return home, Ethan stayed in Philly, working dead-end jobs and crashing on couches, just trying to survive. That's when Lisa walked into the cafe where he was working as a barista, and everything changed. Ethan's world started to shift in ways he hadn't anticipated the moment Emma Parker stepped into his life. It all seemed so innocent at first. Just a chance meeting at the Museum of Modern Art, one of Lisa's favorite places to send him when she wanted to refine his cultural taste. But what Lisa hadn't counted on was Ethan finding a connection with someone else. Someone who saw him for who he was, not just as a younger man to be molded. Emma was different, striking in her own quiet way. She wasn't like Lisa, all polished and controlled, playing the part of a wealthy woman with a young lover on her arm. No, Emma was natural, spontaneous, and full of an energy that Ethan hadn't felt in a long time. At 20, just like Ethan, she was fresh out of college and working part-time as a docent at the museum, leading tours and immersing herself in the art she genuinely loved. Their first conversation was electric. Emma had been guiding a small group through an exhibition, her voice animated as she explained the details of each painting with a passion that Ethan couldn't help but admire. When the tour was over, he stayed behind, lingering by one of the pieces, hoping for an excuse to talk to her. It didn't take long. She noticed him, struck up a conversation, and what began as a casual discussion about art quickly turned into something more. Emma had this way of drawing people in, and Ethan found himself captivated by her enthusiasm and her carefree spirit. It was so different from the world Lisa had introduced him to, where everything was about status, appearances, and control. With Emma, there were no expectations, no games. They just clicked. They laughed about art, shared their favorite music, and even swapped stories about their lives. It felt easy with her, like he didn't have to pretend to be someone he wasn't. Ethan didn't realize how much he had missed that feeling, being able to just be himself. With Lisa, everything was calculated. Every interaction was part of a larger plan, a performance he had to put on to keep her happy and keep the gifts and money flowing. But with Emma, there were no strings attached. She didn't care about how much money he had or what kind of suit he was wearing. She just liked being around him, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt like he could breathe. But as Ethan and Emma's friendship deepened, things began to get more complicated. Ethan tried to hide it at first, slipping out of the estate when Lisa wasn't paying attention, meeting Emma for coffee or sneaking into one of her late-night art tours. But no matter how careful he was, there was always the feeling that Lisa was watching, waiting for something to slip. Ethan knew he was playing with fire. Lisa wasn't the type to let go easily, and if she ever found out about Emma, The fallout would be catastrophic. And yet, he couldn't stay away. Emma had reignited something in him, a sense of freedom, a sense of possibility. She encouraged him to explore his artistic side, something he had buried under the weight of Lisa's expectations. She even gifted him an old vintage camera she'd found at a flea market, insisting that he start taking pictures, capturing the world through his own eyes. It was the kind of thoughtful gesture that Lisa would never make. With Emma, it wasn't about what he could do for her. It was about who he really was. It wasn't long before Ethan found himself making excuses to spend more time with Emma. He would leave the estate under the pretense of attending an art exhibit or a gallery opening, but instead, he'd meet her at a nearby cafe or take long walks with her through the city's parks. There was something innocent about their time together, yet underneath it all, the attraction was undeniable. The more time they spent together, the harder it became for Ethan to ignore the growing tension between them. He couldn't help but notice the way Emma looked at him, the way her eyes sparkled when they talked about their dreams, the way her laughter filled the air with a kind of warmth he hadn't felt in so long. And for Emma, it was clear that Ethan was more than just another guy. There was something about him, something raw, unpolished, that drew her in. He wasn't like the other men she had met at her university, all of them wrapped up in their own ambition. Ethan had a depth to him, a quiet sadness that she found intriguing. But while Ethan and Emma's connection blossomed, Lisa's intuition was sharper than ever. She had always prided herself on her ability to read people, and lately, something was off with Ethan. He was distracted, more distant than usual, and his mind seemed to be elsewhere whenever they were together. Lisa, sensing that he was slipping away, started to feel the tight grip of jealousy creeping in. At first, Lisa played it cool, encouraging Ethan to continue his visits to the museum, thinking it was harmless. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was pulling him away. Her suspicions grew when she noticed him smiling more at his phone, caught up in messages that she wasn't privy to. Lisa wasn't the type to let things slide, especially not when it came to something, or someone, she had worked so hard to control. One evening, as they were getting ready for a charity gala, Lisa casually asked Ethan about his day, probing for details in her usual way. Ethan, caught off guard, tried to play it off. But when Emma's name slipped into the conversation, Lisa's eyes narrowed. She didn't say anything at first, but she didn't have to. The way Ethan spoke about Emma, the light in his eyes, the ease in his voice, it set off alarms in Lisa's mind. Lisa wasn't about to let someone like Emma come between her and Ethan. She had invested too much in him, had given him a life he could never have dreamed of on his own. And Lisa Caldwell wasn't one to lose. If Ethan thought he could slip away quietly, he was in for a rude awakening. Lisa's instincts kicked into high gear, and she knew it was time to take control, to remind Ethan exactly who he belonged to. At first, things between Lisa and Ethan had been almost perfect. Lisa loved parading him around at fancy dinners and lavish parties, showing off her younger, handsome lover to her friends and colleagues. And Ethan, caught up in the whirlwind of luxury, had played the part well. The nights were filled with passion, wild, consuming, and intoxicating. Lisa knew how to push Ethan's buttons, how to make him feel desired in ways no woman ever had before. She controlled every aspect of their intimacy, always knowing how to leave him wanting more. There were nights when she would tease him endlessly, making him beg with just a glance or a soft whisper in his ear. It was as if Lisa had perfected the art of seduction, and Ethan, young and eager, was helpless against it. She'd invite him into her world, letting him experience pleasures he hadn't even known existed. The way she moved, the confidence she exuded, it was magnetic. And Ethan found himself completely entranced by her, pulled into a world where control and desire danced dangerously close to obsession. But as time went on, something shifted. The passion that had once fueled their nights began to feel different. What started as thrilling and exciting was becoming more about power, then connection. Lisa's need to control every part of their relationship spilled into the bedroom, and the line between pleasure and manipulation blurred. Lisa wasn't just keeping Ethan close. She was tightening her grip on him, both physically and emotionally. When they were alone together, the intensity remained, but it had taken on a darker edge. Lisa would still touch him the way she always had, but now there was an unspoken expectation behind every caress. Her hands would linger, not just out of affection, but as a reminder that Ethan was hers. She controlled every encounter, dictating the pace, the rhythm, the outcome. Sometimes, after a heated night, Ethan would lie awake, feeling as though he was losing more of himself each time he gave in to her demands. What had once been a relationship built on mutual attraction now felt like a game of control, with Lisa pulling the strings. It wasn't just the bedroom where things had changed either. Lisa's possessiveness seeped into every part of Ethan's life. She began deciding where he went, what he wore, and even who he could talk to. She wanted him by her side at all times, and when he wasn't, she demanded to know why. Their nights of passion were still hot and intense, but they were no longer about connection. They were about keeping Ethan tethered to her, both physically and emotionally. As Lisa's grip tightened, Ethan started to feel the weight of it more and more. The thrill that had once driven him to her was starting to suffocate him. But there were still moments, flashes of the woman he had been so attracted to, that kept him hooked. Late at night, after one of their passionate encounters, Lisa would trace her fingers along his skin, whispering how much she needed him, how much he meant to her. And for a brief second, Ethan would feel it again. That spark, that desire. But it was fleeting, always overshadowed by the growing tension between them. And then there was Emma. The more time Ethan spent with Emma, the more he realized what was missing in his relationship with Lisa. With Emma, things felt light and easy, a stark contrast to the suffocating intensity of his life with Lisa. Emma's touch wasn't controlling. It was soft, warm, inviting. When they sat together in a cafe or walked through the park, the way her fingers would brush against his made his heart race in a way Lisa's touch no longer did. There was a quiet sensuality in the way Emma leaned in when they talked, her lips just inches from his, her breath warm against his skin. He found himself craving those moments more and more. The way Emma looked at him, with a mixture of curiosity and desire, was intoxicating in its own right. It was so different from Lisa's piercing, possessive gaze. With Emma, Ethan felt alive, free from the weight of expectations. And as their connection deepened, so did the unspoken attraction between them. The tension between Ethan and Emma was undeniable, and it wasn't long before it bubbled to the surface. One evening, after they had spent hours talking about everything and nothing, Emma leaned in, her lips dangerously close to his. There was a moment, a charged, electric second, where everything seemed to pause. Ethan could feel her breath on his skin, his pulse quickening as her hand rested lightly on his thigh. It was innocent, but it sent a rush of heat through him, a reminder of the growing divide between the way he felt around Emma and the way he felt with Lisa. But no matter how drawn he was to Emma, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa was always watching. He had tried to keep his feelings for Emma hidden, but Lisa's intuition was sharp. She could sense the shift in him, and it only made her tighten her grip even more. The sex with Lisa became more intense, more demanding. She pushed Ethan further, as if trying to prove that no matter how far he drifted, he was still hers. The line between pleasure and control had become so thin that Ethan didn't know where one ended and the other began. The physical connection with Lisa was still there, but it no longer felt like a partnership. It felt like domination. Lisa knew exactly how to make Ethan come back to her, using their intimacy as a weapon, as if every touch, every kiss, was a reminder of what she had given him and what he owed her. And every time Ethan tried to pull away, she pulled him back in, whether with her body, her words, or the luxuries she showered him with. But deep down, Ethan knew that no number of gifts or passion could erase the growing desire for something real, something genuine, something he had begun to find with Emma. Just as things were reaching a boiling point between Lisa and Ethan, another person entered the picture: Emma Parker. Emma was a 20-year-old art history major at a local university and worked part-time as a docent at the city's Museum of Modern Art. Ethan first met her during one of his regular visits to the museum, a habit Lisa encouraged to refine his appreciation of fine art. Emma was different. She wasn't like Lisa, who approached art as a status symbol. Emma had genuine passion. She brought the paintings to life with her animated explanations, and it drew Ethan in. After one of her tours, Ethan introduced himself, and they hit it off right away. They talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories about art, life, and everything in between. For the first time in months, Ethan felt like someone saw him for who he really was. Emma was carefree, spontaneous, and vibrant, the complete opposite of Lisa's polished, controlled existence. Their friendship grew fast, and Ethan started spending more and more time at the museum, always making sure to be there when Emma was working. It wasn't long before Lisa noticed the shift in Ethan's behavior. He was distracted, checking his phone constantly, and making excuses to be away from the house. Lisa's suspicions grew, and one night, while they were getting ready for a charity event, she casually asked him about his day. Ethan tried to cover up, but when he mentioned Emma's name, Lisa could feel something was off. Her jealousy, which had been simmering beneath the surface, started to boil over. Lisa wasn't about to let go of the control she had over Ethan. Determined to find out what was really going on, she installed a GPS tracker on his phone under the guise of upgrading his security. She even hired a private investigator to follow him. What the investigator reported confirmed Lisa's worst fears. Ethan was spending a lot of time with a younger woman, and their body language showed clear signs of attraction. Lisa's jealousy turned into a full-blown obsession. One moment, she'd shower Ethan with gifts, hoping to win him back, and the next, she'd freeze him out with cold, passive-aggressive remarks. The emotional roller coaster was exhausting for both of them. Lisa's manipulative behavior didn't stop at emotional games. She started withholding Ethan's allowance, blaming it on business issues that conveniently always seemed to coincide with times she wanted more of his attention. When Ethan pushed back, she'd eventually relent, but not before extracting promises from him about spending more time together or staying away from certain places, like the museum. She also began controlling his social life. Lisa would plan trips or events that conveniently interfered with any plans Ethan had with friends. Bit by bit, his world shrank, until it seemed like Lisa was his only source of companionship. She used guilt as her main tool, constantly reminding Ethan of all the things she had done for him, how she'd rescued him from his aimless life, how without her, he'd be nothing. This manipulation started to take its toll on Ethan. He began to feel trapped, caught in a web of control that he couldn't escape. The pressure was building, and something was going to break. Ethan had been playing a dangerous game, balancing his growing connection with Emma against the tightening grip of Lisa. The pull between them was tearing him apart, and he knew it. His time with Emma had opened his eyes to a life he thought he'd lost, a life where he could just be himself, free from the constant demands and manipulations of Lisa. But Lisa wasn't letting go, and Ethan was too deep in to just walk away. Every time Ethan stepped back into Lisa's mansion after spending time with Emma, a crushing wave of guilt hit him. Lisa would greet him with her usual seductive charm, always with a new surprise, a lavish gift, a fancy dinner, or an intimate night she'd orchestrate to keep him close. She knew exactly how to make Ethan feel special, but in the pit of his stomach, that same magic was starting to turn sour. What used to thrill him now felt like a burden. The intense passion that had once pulled him toward Lisa was slowly becoming a reminder of how trapped he really was. It wasn't just the sex, though. That physical connection had become a weapon for Lisa, a way to remind Ethan of everything she had done for him and how much he owed her. She'd whisper things to him in bed, things that made him feel important, but also bound to her. "You're my everything," she'd say, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin. "You know that, don't you? You're all I need." But to Ethan, those words started to sound more like chains, tightening around him. Lisa wasn't asking for his love anymore. She was demanding his loyalty, his submission, and every part of his life. Ethan's heart wasn't in it anymore, and Lisa could feel it. Every time she reached out to touch him, there was a split second of hesitation in his response, a moment where his body flinched, even though he tried to hide it. It was subtle, but it was there, and Lisa wasn't the type to ignore signs like that. The more Ethan pulled away, the harder she clung to him. Their nights together became more desperate, more intense. Lisa would push him to the edge, knowing exactly how to keep him hooked. But once the thrill faded, Ethan was left feeling emptier than before. And then there was Emma. The thought of her crept into Ethan's mind constantly, even when he was with Lisa. The way Emma smiled, the way she laughed, the way she looked at him. It was all so genuine, so free of expectations. With Emma, there were no games, no manipulations. She didn't need to control him. She just wanted him to be himself. And that scared Ethan, because with every passing day, he realized more and more that he wanted to be that man. The man who was free to live his own life, not the one who was trapped in Lisa's gilded cage. But the guilt ate away at him. How could he walk away from Lisa? She had pulled him out of the gutter, given him a life most people could only dream of. She had transformed him from a nobody into someone with status, wealth, and admiration. Everything he had now was because of her. Yet, deep down, he couldn't deny the growing resentment bubbling beneath the surface. He couldn't ignore the anger that surged every time Lisa reminded him of everything she'd done for him, every time she dangled her power over his head like a noose. Lisa sensed the shift, and that made her even more relentless. She began showing up unexpectedly, popping into the museum during his visits, texting him constantly to check in, and planning spontaneous trips that conveniently pulled him away from Emma. Her presence was suffocating, and Ethan could feel the walls closing in. Then came the night that broke him. They had just returned from another charity gala. Lisa had spent the evening proudly introducing Ethan to everyone she could, making sure he was always at her side, always under her watchful eye. But Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Emma. Her smile, the way she'd brushed his hand earlier that day, her soft laugh echoing in his mind. He felt a knot tightening in his chest, an unbearable tension that had been building for weeks. By the time they got home, Ethan felt like he was suffocating, trapped in a world he didn't want anymore. As they entered the house, Lisa, dressed in her elegant gown, was already making plans for the evening, talking about their next trip, her voice smooth and controlled. But Ethan wasn't listening. He was distracted, his thoughts racing, his heart pounding. Lisa noticed, of course, and with a cold, knowing smile, she asked the question that shattered the thin thread holding everything together. "Where were you earlier today, Ethan?" she asked, her voice casual but laced with suspicion. "I called, but you didn't pick up." Ethan's stomach dropped. He tried to play it off, offering some excuse about running errands. But Lisa wasn't buying it. She stepped closer, her eyes sharp, her voice low. "I know you've been seeing her," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "You think I don't know? You think you can hide from me?" Ethan froze. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. He tried to deny it, but Lisa's grip on his arm tightened, her nails digging into his skin. "Don't lie to me, Ethan," she hissed. "I've given you everything. I've made you who you are. And this is how you repay me?" That was the moment Ethan broke. All the guilt, the shame, the resentment. It exploded inside him. and for the first time in months, he couldn't hold it back. "I can't do this anymore, Lisa," he said, his voice shaking. "I can't keep living like this." The look on Lisa's face was one he'd never forget. Her eyes, usually so cold and calculating, flashed with fury. She stepped back, her expression hardening. "You think you can just leave me?" she spat. "After everything I've done for you? After everything I've given you?" Ethan could barely breathe. His heart was racing, his hands trembling. He knew there was no turning back now. "It's not about the money, Lisa," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to be free. I need to live my own life." For a moment, Lisa just stared at him, as if she couldn't comprehend what he was saying. And then, slowly, her face twisted into a smile, a cold, calculating smile. "You think you can leave me?" she said softly. "I know everything about you, Ethan. I know who you are, where you come from. I know your secrets." And that's when she revealed her final card. Ethan felt as though time had slowed down after Lisa's bombshell. Her words echoed in his head like a ringing bell. "I know your secrets." His pulse quickened, the room suddenly too small, too stifling. He had never imagined it would come to this, a moment where his entire life could come crashing down, where Lisa would take control in the most terrifying way possible. Lisa's cold eyes pierced him, her smile curling with satisfaction as she watched him struggle to process her words. She knew she had him now. "You think you can just walk away, don't you?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can run off to your little fling and live happily ever after? Well, guess what, Ethan? You can't. Not with what I know." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, a cold sweat forming on his brow. She had uncovered the one thing he had tried to bury, the one dark secret from his past that haunted him, his involvement in that hit and run back in college. It was an accident he'd never forgiven himself for, a mistake that had changed his life forever. He had fled the scene in panic, convinced that no one had seen him. But now, years later, Lisa had the proof. And worse, she had the power to ruin him with it. "I know everything," she whispered, stepping closer. "The accident. The girl you hit. The one you left lying there in the street." Her words sliced through him like a knife, each one drawing more guilt, more shame. "Do you think you can hide from that forever? Do you think I won't use it if you try to leave me?" Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing. He felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of his own past, and Lisa's manipulation. She had him cornered, and she knew it. Every step she took toward him felt like a noose tightening around his neck. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the walls closing in around him. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears, drowning out every other sound. It was over. He knew it. No matter what he did, no matter how far he tried to run, Lisa would never let him go. "You're not going anywhere," Lisa continued, her voice rising in intensity. "I've built you, Ethan. I gave you everything. And now you want to betray me? To throw it all away for some girl who can never give you what I have?" Her tone shifted from rage to something more desperate, more unsettling. "I made you what you are. You're mine." That word, mine, sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. The possessiveness in her voice, the way she looked at him like a prize she refused to lose, sent his emotions spiraling. He wanted to shout, to scream, to do anything to break the suffocating grip she had on him, but his words were stuck in his throat. The guilt, the shame, the fear, they all swirled inside him, making him feel weak, powerless. "Lisa, please," Ethan stammered, his voice barely audible. He was pleading now, desperation creeping into every word. He wanted her to stop, to give him some space to breathe, to think. But Lisa wasn't finished. She stepped even closer, her fingers reaching out to trace along his jawline, the same touch that had once ignited his passion, now sending chills down his spine. Do you think she knows who you really are? Lisa taunted, her voice soft but cutting. Do you think Emma would want you if she knew the truth? If she knew the real Ethan Cooper, the coward who ran away, who left someone to die in the street? Ethan's chest tightened, his stomach churning. It was the truth, of course. The guilt had been eating away at him for years, and now Lisa was dangling it over his head like a guillotine, ready to drop at any moment. The fear of losing everything, Emma, his freedom, his entire future, was crushing him. His mind raced, searching for a way out, but there was none. Lisa had the upper hand, and she knew exactly how to wield it. His hands shook as he tried to steady himself, but the weight of the situation was too much. He was drowning, lost in a sea of regret and fear, and Lisa was the one holding him under. "You can't leave me, Ethan," she continued, her voice now eerily calm, almost gentle. "I won't let you. You think you can escape me, but you're wrong. I own you. I've always owned you." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He could feel the walls closing in, the pressure mounting until he couldn't take it anymore. The room seemed to tilt, his vision blurring as the enormity of the situation crushed him from all sides. His breathing became shallow, panic rising in his chest. He needed to get out, to break free before he suffocated completely. Ethan staggered backward, his hand reaching for the doorknob, but Lisa was quicker. She grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin with a ferocity that sent a jolt of pain shooting through him. "You're not going anywhere," she hissed, her eyes wild. "You belong to me." And that's when something snapped inside Ethan. All the fear, the guilt, the shame, it all combusted at once. He couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't stand the way Lisa looked at him, the way she twisted his life into something he no longer recognized. The desperation clawed at him from the inside, pushing him past the point of reason. "No, Lisa," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "I'm done. I'm done being yours." Lisa's eyes widened, fury flashing across her face. "You think you can just walk away from me?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "I'll ruin you, Ethan. I'll destroy everything you've built. You'll be nothing without me. Nothing." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he finally stepped forward, breaking free from Lisa's grasp. "I'd rather be nothing than stay trapped here with you," he spat, the anger rising in his voice. For the first time, he saw her for what she really was. Not the woman who had saved him, but the one who had trapped him in a prison of her own making. The rage on Lisa's face twisted into something terrifying. Her calm, controlled exterior shattered, revealing a storm of emotion underneath. She lunged at him, her fists pounding against his chest, her voice rising to a shrill scream. "You can't leave me, Ethan! You're mine!" Instinct took over, and Ethan shoved her away, his own anger boiling to the surface. "It's over, Lisa. I don't care what you do anymore. I'm leaving." Lisa stumbled back, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. Time seemed to slow as she teetered for a split second, her balance faltering. Ethan reached out, but it was too late. Lisa's body twisted as she fell backward, her head crashing into the sharp corner of the marble fireplace with a sickening crack. The room fell deathly silent. Ethan's breath hitched as he stood frozen, staring at Lisa's motionless body on the floor. Blood began to pool around her head, spreading slowly across the cold marble. His mind went blank, panic gripping him as the reality of what had just happened crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. Lisa Caldwell was dead, and it was his fault. The world around Ethan seemed to stop. Time stretched into slow motion as he stared at Lisa's lifeless body, crumpled against the cold marble floor. The sound of her head hitting the fireplace, that sickening crack, replayed in his mind on a loop, each echo growing louder, more unbearable. The blood, oh God, the blood, seeped into the cracks of the floor, pooling beneath her hair, spreading like a dark stain across the pristine white surface. Ethan stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat, his mind screaming at him to move, to do something. But his body wouldn't obey. He stumbled backward, his legs shaky, his heart pounding in his ears like a drumbeat of terror. "Lisa," he whispered, though his voice was barely audible over the deafening silence that had consumed the room. He took a step forward, his hands trembling uncontrollably, as if reaching out to her might somehow undo what had just happened. But Lisa didn't move. Her body was unnaturally still, her chest no longer rising and falling with breath. Panic hit him like a freight train. What have I done? His mind raced with that single thought, repeating over and over, louder and louder, until it drowned out everything else. His pulse quickened, the cold grip of fear tightening around his chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had only wanted to get away, to escape her suffocating control. But now, she was dead. Dead. And it was because of him. Ethan's knees buckled as the weight of the moment slammed into him. He crouched down beside Lisa, his hands hovering just above her, as though afraid to touch her, terrified to confirm what he already knew deep down, that she was gone. What do I do? His thoughts spiraled into chaos. His mind flashed back to all the nights she had whispered promises of control, threats that she'd destroy him if he ever tried to leave. And now, it was over, but not in the way he'd imagined. "Lisa," he whispered again, his voice breaking, as if speaking her name could somehow bring her back. But the only response was the eerie stillness that filled the room, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, marking the seconds as they dragged by. Each tick felt like a countdown to the moment his life would unravel. He was trapped. There was no escaping what had just happened. He couldn't undo the fall, couldn't erase the blood staining the floor beneath her. The consequences of this moment began to crash down on him with full force. The police. What will they think? Will they believe me? His mind raced through the terrifying possibilities. Prison, trials, his life torn apart for good. How could he explain this? How could he convince anyone that it was an accident when every fiber of his being screamed that it was all his fault? Suddenly, Ethan was up on his feet, adrenaline surging through his veins, propelling him into a state of blind panic. He paced around the room, his breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. His eyes darted around, scanning the space as though the solution might somehow be hiding in plain sight. But there was no escape, no way out of this nightmare. He ran his hand through his hair, tugging at it as if trying to pull himself back to reality. Think, think, think. But his thoughts were jumbled, crashing into each other like waves in a storm. He felt like he was drowning in them, suffocating beneath the weight of what had just happened. Lisa's words from their argument still hung in the air, mocking him, echoing in his mind. "You're mine." The possessive fury in her voice, the way her eyes had burned with anger and desperation just before the fall, it was all too much. And then, as though on cue, the reality of what had just occurred hit him with the force of a wrecking ball. Lisa was dead, but her power over him lingered. Even in death, she had him cornered. His life was ruined. There was no coming back from this. Ethan's entire world had been flipped upside down in an instant, and the one person who had held all the control, all the cards, was lying in a pool of her own blood, gone forever. As he paced the room, a voice at the back of his mind began to whisper the cold, hard truth. He needed to leave. He needed to get out before everything collapsed around him. But as he turned toward the door, a new wave of guilt hit him. I can't just leave her like this. He couldn't abandon the woman who had given him everything, no matter how twisted their relationship had become. She had been the one who'd saved him when he was nothing, and now she was gone because of him. Ethan's body trembled as he looked back at Lisa's body. Her once commanding presence, so full of life and control, now reduced to a motionless figure. She was gone. The realization settled in his chest like a lead weight. He was alone now, truly alone. The woman who had shaped his life, for better or worse, was no longer there to manipulate him, no longer there to pull his strings. But instead of feeling relief, the reality of her death made him feel more trapped than ever. He looked around the room, scanning the opulent surroundings, the expensive artwork, the marble fireplace, the designer furniture, and realized just how deeply he had been entangled in Lisa's web. Everything around him reminded him of her control, her influence, her dominance over every aspect of his life. And now, even in death, she had control over his future. His head spun, his heart racing with panic. The room seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing in from all sides. His breath quickened, his hands shaking as he realized he had no plan, no idea what to do next. He could run, but where? And even if he did, it wouldn't erase the truth of what had happened. There was no way out. Suddenly, Ethan heard a noise outside, a car door slamming shut. His body tensed, his heart pounding in his chest as fear flooded through him. Someone was here. The housekeeper? A neighbor? His mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. What if they see the blood? What if they find her? Without thinking, Ethan bolted for the back door. His mind was a blur of panic and fear, his feet moving faster than his thoughts as he ran outside into the cool night air. The darkness wrapped around him, but it did nothing to ease the weight pressing down on his chest. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled down the steps, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He could feel the night swallowing him up, the chill biting into his skin, but none of it compared to the cold fear gripping his soul. He didn't know where he was going, or how far he'd get, but one thing was certain. He was running. Running from the scene, from Lisa's lifeless body, from the truth that would soon come crashing down on him like a tidal wave. The sound of the car door echoed again in the distance, a reminder that time was running out. And as Ethan disappeared into the shadows of the night, he knew that no matter how fast he ran, no matter how far he went, he could never outrun what he'd done. The room seemed to close in on Ethan, the silence so oppressive it felt like the air had been sucked out of the house. His ears rang with the echo of that sickening crack as Lisa's head hit the corner of the fireplace. The world outside might have been still turning, but for Ethan, time had stopped. His mind screamed at him to do something, anything, but his body remained frozen, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. The blood was spreading slowly, staining the flawless white marble beneath her head, like an ink blot expanding in slow motion. Ethan's eyes locked on it, unable to look away. It was real. This was real. Lisa was dead. The realization hit him like a hammer, knocking the wind out of him. His chest tightened, and a wave of nausea swept over him as the enormity of what had just happened crashed down on him like a tidal wave. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one more desperate than the last. The walls of the room, the paintings, the expensive furniture, all seemed to tilt and twist around him, warping under the pressure of the moment. What have I done? The thought roared through his mind, his conscience tearing at him. He had wanted freedom, but not like this. Never like this. Ethan took a step back, his legs trembling as though they were about to give out. His back hit the wall, but it didn't bring him any comfort. His heart was hammering in his chest, beating so loudly he swore he could hear it in the stillness. She's gone. She's really gone. There was no undoing it, no way to reverse what had just happened. His breath came in short, panicked bursts as he tried to steady himself, but the weight of the moment was too much. Lisa was lying there, unmoving, and it was because of him. The guilt hit him like a sledgehammer, doubling him over as he gasped for air. He had wanted to break free from her, to escape the prison she had created around him, but now all he felt was trapped in an even darker cell, one of his own making. The crushing guilt swirled with fear, the two emotions tangling together in his chest like a vice squeezing tighter and tighter. I didn't mean for this to happen. The thought clawed its way through his mind, desperate, pleading. But it didn't matter what he meant to do. What mattered was what had happened, and there was no escaping that now. Suddenly, Ethan was up on his feet, adrenaline surging through his veins, propelling him into a state of blind panic. He rushed toward Lisa's body, his knees hitting the floor beside her with a painful thud. His trembling hands hovered above her, shaking uncontrollably. His fingers brushed against her pale skin, cold, lifeless. He recoiled, unable to bear the sensation, the finality of it. "What do I do?" his mind screamed, but there was no answer, no solution that could fix this. His heart pounded harder, the adrenaline surging through his system as his thoughts spiraled into chaos. The police. What will they think? Will they believe me? His mind raced through the terrifying possibilities. Prison, trials, his life torn apart for good. How could he explain this? How could he convince anyone that it was an accident when every fiber of his being screamed that it was all his fault? Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the air, a wailing reminder that his time was running out. He froze, heart racing, adrenaline flooding through him. The blaring noise echoed through the alley, and Ethan knew he had to make a choice: run and continue hiding, or face the consequences of what had happened. There's no way out now, he thought, the reality crashing down on him like a tidal wave. The police would be arriving at the house soon, and with every moment that passed, his chances of escaping the truth slipped away. He had to confront what he had done. He had to face Lisa's legacy, the chaos he'd unleashed, the emotional turmoil that had consumed him. But just as he turned to leave the alley, he was met with the piercing gaze of a figure approaching. Detective Lydia Blackwell, a veteran officer known for her relentless pursuit of the truth. The moment their eyes met, the weight of his actions crashed down on him like a tidal wave. She knew something was off, and the way her eyes narrowed told him she wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth. "Ethan Cooper," she said, her voice steady but filled with authority, as though she already knew his every secret. "I need to talk to you." His heart sank. The reality of his situation pressed down on him like a lead weight. There was nowhere left to run, no escaping the truth. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and it was time to face the consequences of his choices. As the sirens blared in the distance, Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. He was standing on the precipice of a new life, one that could lead to freedom or prison, salvation or damnation. And as Detective Blackwell approached, he realized that his journey had only just begun. But as he faced the unfolding chaos, one question lingered in his mind. Was it possible to break free from the shackles of guilt, or was he destined to be forever haunted by the shadows of his past? Now, we want to hear from you. What would you do in Ethan's place? How would you confront the consequences of your actions? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll explore another shocking true crime story. And don't forget to follow us on social media for updates and exclusive content.